All right, welcome back to New Testament Survey. As we continue our discussion of the books of the New Testament, we're going to continue now with the book of Acts, which I've subtitled here, Witness for Christ, from chapter 1, verse 8, which we'll also see as the theme verse and key verse for the entire book. You shall be my witnesses, that we are to witness for the resurrection of Christ. Of course, Jesus at the very beginning of the book is setting up his plan for the disciples to carry forth the gospel to Jerusalem first, and then Judea and Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world, that they would testify that Jesus Christ is risen. That's the key idea, that they would witness. They would be testifying to his resurrection, that they saw his resurrection. Again, the author is Luke. We've already seen that and so you can go back and look at the video on the Gospel of Luke to look a little bit more about the author himself. We see that he's if we look internally in the book, we see he's a companion of Paul. There's a use of the word "we" throughout the book, which we'll actually can see when Paul is added, or when Luke is added to Paul's group, and when he leaves the group. Notably in chapter 16, when Paul visits Philippi, and then again in chapter 20, and then chapter 27 through 28, while Paul is imprisoned in Caesarea toward the end of his life. Really, ultimately, the last couple of chapters of the book, as Paul goes all the way to Rome with Luke in tow. So the only two companions that are not named in the book are Titus and Luke himself. So obviously must be either Luke or Titus. All of the evidence points toward Dr. Luke. Frequent use of medical terms, just like in the Gospel of Luke, again points to Luke. The recipients, again, we talk about Theophilus, but really ultimately written not just specifically to Theophilus, but to all those who would know the truth of the gospel and its initial spread into all the world. The date and circumstances of writing: during Paul's first Roman imprisonment there, chapter 60, around 60 to 62 AD. You'll note that no information about Paul after his release from his first Roman imprisonment is given, and so that must be the termination point of when the book was finished and began to be published and circulated, which is kind of odd. Why leave out those final? We do know that after Paul's first Roman imprisonment, he did travel. He writes the book of Titus and First Timothy during that time, and we see that he's not in Rome. Then he's imprisoned again. There's no information about Paul's death, his martyrdom. You'd think that would be key or clue to the end of the book of Acts, the martyrdom of Paul and Peter all at the same time. All of that information is missing. The burning of Rome is missing from the end of the book of Acts. So we assume that it must have been written sometime around Paul's first Roman imprisonment. The purpose of the book: to confirm Theophilus in his faith, stated right there at the very beginning, chapter 1, verse 1, and to show how the work that Christ began continues through the acts of the Holy Spirit. Notice in chapter 1, verse 1, if you've got it in front of you, it says the things that Christ began to do, he's continuing to do, in a sense, through his church, through the Holy Spirit, to show the geographical expansion of the church from Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria to the uttermost parts of the world, as outlined in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, and to provide biographical information about Peter and Paul, although that's a secondary purpose, that he's not trying to give us all of the biographical information, but only as it fits within his construct of what he wants to point out, how the Holy Spirit is expanding the church beyond Jerusalem and all the way to Rome, because basically that's kind of how the book works, from Jerusalem to Rome. When Paul gets to Rome, that's the end of the book, because that's the end of the purpose, is to show how the gospel got from Jerusalem to Rome, which, i.e., the ends of the earth. The key verse, of course, chapter 1, verse 8 already mentioned it, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. This verse can be used then as an outline for the rest of the book. When we get to the outline in the next video, we'll see how that actually works out by verse. The key words: Holy Spirit is used, or Spirit is used 68 times with the word holy in front of it, 40 times in just 28 chapters. Obviously, the work of the Holy Spirit is so key to the book of Acts. Some have even said that it's not the Acts of the Apostles, but rather that the book is the Acts of the Holy Spirit, as the apostles are sensitive to the working of the Holy Spirit and the movement of the Holy Spirit, and are obedient to what the Holy Spirit is doing in them and through them and directing them to do. The word witness used in different forms, 13 times as a noun, 11 times as a verb. By the way, this is the Greek word for witness is where we get the word martyr. Someone who dies for their faith, i.e. Stephen and James in this book are martyred for their faith. They have given the ultimate witness to their faith in that they have died for their faith. This term martyr would be used throughout history, then church history, to refer to those who gave the ultimate witness when they gave their very life. This, by the way, is in church history, the word martyr for those who would give their life for their faith, those who would be tested in their faith in trial but not lose their faith. In other words, they're told to renounce their faith, but they ultimately don't die or give up their faith. In the early church history, they would call those people confessors, but not martyrs, not witnesses. Central idea then: the Holy Spirit does his work as the church begins and expands out into the world. That's all we have for the beginning part here of the book of Acts. We'll look forward to the next video when we look at some of the distinctive features of the book.